Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Heart of CX. This is our fourth installment of the personalization masterclass that we're giving. And I'm Max Ball. And Joanna, I'm going to throw over to you, and you can kind of set us up and we'll get going here.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And hello. So I'm really excited about this fourth session for the Personalization Masterclass. We're talking about managing the customer's emotional journey. And it was interesting as we were preparing for this and just outlining the various different sessions, how much there was to talk about on the emotional journey and how to really manage that. So looking forward to today's conversation. I can't believe, Wes and Scott, that it's been 4 episodes with you all.
No, it's crazy. I'm flying.
It is.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat what we've said offline a number of times. What a treat this has been for Joanna and I to have you guys. We really appreciate all the time. It's been wonderful.
You're too kind. The pleasure is ours, and the honor is really working with you guys and having these discussions. It's been great. So thank you.
Cool. So on the emotional journey, Scott and Wes, we've talked about this multiple times. You're talking about finances. You're talking about health. These are as emotional a journey as somebody's going to have in their lifetime. And how do you get your agents ready for that? I mean, this isn't, buying stickers or something like that. This is very real stuff.
It is. Wes, you want to kick us off, or you want me to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not buying stickers. That sounds like a nice experience, pretty low key. Unfortunately, this is not a low-key experience for our frontline team. And so, to one of the things that's been a recurring theme, we talk about culture, we talk about enablement. And with our frontline team, one of the things that's been, I guess, at the forefront is we understand what we can provide. We're limited in the scope of what solutions we can provide a patient or a consumer on these calls. That being said, what we can do that's unique is listen and kind of identify their needs. Everyone's going to have distinct different needs. And, one of the things that Scott and I are constantly trying to understand is what are the key pieces we could take away in conversation to better align and more quickly identify those needs. So that's, Scott, I don't know, that to me is one of the most important things.
Yeah.
Is that awareness around what's going on with each individual patient.
Yeah, I mean, I jokingly say all humans are weird and unique, and it's true. Everybody has their own unique situations, and there's a difference between active listening and passively just listening to people. And if you find yourself just passively there, passively listening, not engaged, you're missing the small details in the conversation that matter with people. And I think, being able to infer and interpret the tone and what people are trying to convey to you over a telephone call, it's wonderful when we can sit here and look at each other's facial expressions. I can be really animated with my hands and all these things. And you get all these cues, right, from these gestures. But actively listening to what people are saying and how they're saying it and what their real needs are, that's a skill. So active listening is not something that is inherent to most people. Ironically, it's something you have to teach. It's something you have to emphasize. And when let's say you audit a phone call, right? And you're in the audit process, pointing out the small nuances. If you have a really great agent, which, they're like scoring high on all their audits and everything like that. But if you take an agent like that, how do you elevate them from good to great? That's a common theme in our organization is how do we go from good to great? Taking those small nuances and conversations and pointing them out when you're listening to a phone call together, and then highlighting, hey, that's an active listening moment right there. Hear the change in inflection of tone of voice, or hear how they shifted gears on this phone and this part of the phone call, or you shouldn't be talking at this point. Sometimes just listening to people is in this emotional journey that people are on that often we face. Just listening and staying engaged, and while you're listening, it makes all the difference in the world. And then in turn, when you learn that, the difference between active listening and passive listening, in turn, then you start understanding the differences between empathy and when to apply sympathy. Two different things, right? And empathy and sympathy aren't always appropriate depending on what you're speaking to and what the caller or in our world the patient is telling us. So we have everything from, I took little Johnny to the primary care physician to, he had a sniffle in his nose and you're trying to work out some basic stuff, to an individual that might be in stage 5, stage 4 cancer. Conversations are very different. Sympathy and empathy and how those are applied in those conversations are very different. Active listening and passive listening, very different. So it's the small nuances in the emotional journey that matter. And that's something we try to highlight and take some active approaches towards.
So I'm curious about the enablement around that and the hiring around that. Is that, how much of that is just inherent in someone? And is it, how do you, even in an interview process, understand somebody's empathy level, if you will? And is there training? I mean, I what you talked about was really pretty intense one-on-one coaching. I get that. Is there stuff you do in the initial onboarding process, or is it really just you got to get them in there and start teaching? That's a very wide question, and I know you guys can handle that, so I'll throw it out that way.
It's a great question, and this is something actually Wesley and our greater team, we were just talking about this the other day, and for us, I think we're learning and we're getting better. But something came out of our last hiring discussion that we had as an organization around this, and I don't know how exactly we vet this up front yet or whatnot, but finding genuine people that are genuine. And when we can find, so we had 2 recent new hires, and a common theme kept coming up in conversation as we discussed these new hires and we're onboarding them and training them, and people, they're just so genuine and they're so great and they're just so genuine. And I think there's a difference when you talk about somebody being truly genuine in nature, right, to somebody just being a good person or whatnot. There's again, we're talking about the nuances and the slight details. So how you can approach that in the hiring process of vetting of that genuine, being genuine up front as a human being, right, at the end of the day, I think translates really well into what makes somebody successful in our organization. And do I have the science down of how Wesley and our greater team are filtering that out? No, I don't have the answer. Some of it's just you have to infer a little bit yourself, have a little bit of intuition, I think, towards those things when you're speaking to people. I'm sure there's somebody that's got one of those personality tests out there that can determine those things probably, but that's the closest answer I think to date that we've gotten on that.
That's good. And then on the enablement side, beyond that kind of intense coaching, is there anything you can do, or does it really just come down to that?
Well, there's basic customer service skills, right, Wes? I mean,
I think on the enablement side, I think it's expectation setting too. So, it's like, hey, this isn't your traditional, organization. We're an extension thereof. So again, like that cultural thing, it all starts with whomever somebody interacts with from a candidate standpoint. They have to be real and genuine too. And in fact, probably one of the best, most genuine individuals we have, really facilitates that process for us. And, I think that's really, really, really important. But then when you look at enablement, I mean, it's continuous, right? I mean, when we talk about the pandemic last year, that really caused us to have to think, okay, we need to maybe frame some stuff up a little bit differently. And then we had uniqueness to how our clients wanted to approach it. Some wanted to acknowledge, others kind of just, all right, we get it, but what, we're operating 60, 90 days in arrears, right? So that was another component that kind of came into this. And The other thing was the empathy became even more real, because each one of those conversations extended beyond purely just what healthcare services had been performed, or a caregiving process or treatment process someone's involved with. Now it's, well, not only did that just happen to me, or did I just have to have a operation or some surgery 60, 90 days ago, but my husband, my wife, any significant other, or someone in my family has been affected by this pandemic. And that truly presented a challenge to us. I think that also helped kind of, Scott, redefine, how we approach things too. It forced us to change our business and change enablement in the sense that it needs to be more dynamic. It needs to be a conversation. It can't always just be, hey, here's a quiz. Hey, here's an example. So the relatability in the conversations we have is pretty important.
Yeah.
And
I
go
just
ahead.
feel like on that, Wes, like we really transitioned into really emphasizing we're here to help at the end of the day. Max, your question is, hey, how are you enabling your frontline staff and whatnot? And I don't think you get away from basic, fundamental, great customer service skills, right? Those don't go away.
Yeah.
You continuously train towards them. You continuously talk about them and whatnot. I think the details matter, though. At the end of the day, I think going back to some of those, active, passive listening, all those hardcore, side by side trainings. I think that's how you elevate from good to great. But for us, what Wesley just outlined is important because there was all these intangible things that were happening in people's lives, right? And some of it, you could hear it on calls. You could hear this overwhelming, like, I feel overwhelmed with life in general right now on calls. So, first acknowledging that with our staff, that this is what we're hearing and this is what's happening. Quantify it. Try to summarize it for people. And then how do we then communicate back down to our staff and say, hey, it is really important because this is what we're hearing. This is what's going on, right? We need to make sure we're positioning ourselves on every phone call that we're here to help. And I felt like that was a theme on all of our calls that went through. So, yeah.
Interesting. And so as we think about this, as we think about being human, active listening, showing empathy, we're here to help. There's also the flip side of this, that you are a business and you're there to get results. And so is there such a thing as over empathizing? And how do you make sure that the staff doesn't do that?
Well, quick Ring Central plug would be, the voice analytics piece is pretty important, right? I mean, you can't, Scott, we're tens of thousands of conversations per month, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way we can wrangle all of that purely within our quality team and, some other mechanisms we have. So that being said, managing by exception, taking a look at longer conversations, that's traditionally going to be indicative of somebody getting a little off the rails, right? And then the expectation setting, that we're here to help, but we work on behalf of the health system. Don't forget who we are, who we represent. And, we're here to help a patient, but we still have accountability to ourselves, our business, and our clients. And I think, that's just a general reminder. Thankfully, not systemic, but it can be easy to do. Do you get somebody saying something that's very relatable or that strikes a chord or tugs at your heart, like Scott likes to say. And then the next thing you know, you're 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes into a deep conversation that has nothing to do with, obviously, what we engage the patient for or what they engaged us for.
I think interaction analytics is such a powerful tool, especially when it comes to customer sentiment analysis and being able to tie trending to that customer sentiment analysis. So what are some of those use cases that you've been able to leverage interaction analytics and tie it directly back to the customer emotions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's a few different use cases that we've been able to start with, and we always take the approach of cast a wide net, start simple, and then kind of break it down. That's kind of a best practice when you talk about speech analytics. Like, okay, we're gonna go out, we're gonna be a fisherman, we're gonna cast this big net. We're going to see what's all out there in this net, and then we're going to start like slicing and dicing it down and figuring out what makes sense at the end of the day. So just think about that process when we talk about speech analytics and business use cases. So, when things that are interesting for us are, Wes already talked about. So long calls are indicative to there's something happening. So that's an easy metric to put into it. But then you start coupling that with phrases or certain categories of things. So let's say a health system makes a change to their policy that directly affects the consumer in a situation, right? Us being able to then capture keywords, phrases, things about that change in that policy. So let's say like a payment plan, for example, they changed terms around payment plans. They used to be 12 months and now they've gone to 24 months, or vice versa. They were at 24 months payment plan and they went to a 12-month payment plan. What are people saying about that? What is their sentiment around those things? So being able to capture those emotions around that, there's a lot of emotion that comes out of those things, especially if it's going in the opposite direction to 12, from 24 to 12, right? What are people saying about that? How do they feel about it? What's the overall, and being able to quantify those things too, I think is really key. We've had 1,000 phone calls talking about your payment plan change, right? And 700 of those calls had negative sentiment associated with it.
Joanna, I want you to kind of chime in on that because you are such the expert at getting the input from the contact center over to the rest of the business. And what's striking me here is for Scott and Wes, it's not their business. They got to go reach out to a whole nother organization and get that feedback. So I'm kind of curious about your opinions, and Scott and Wes, how you actually can be effective giving that feedback.
So this opens my eyes in terms of this is another value add in terms of you are providing a service of taking these phone calls and handling the claims management, but it's more than that. You're invested in their success and their success from a customer experience, patient experience perspective. And so providing those additional insights to, the other healthcare systems and showing where that patient friction is only going to add to your relationship with that third party for sure. I think that's great because a lot of times, you could say, okay, we're here and we're contracted to deal with the claims processing, but it's more than that. Your culture that you've created to really provide that great experience for the customer goes beyond your walls. And you don't say, hey, we're the victim here. We're powerless. It's, hey, we're going to feed this information back. We're going to make that experience better, whether it's within our walls or outside our walls. So love those use cases for sure.
Yeah, I mean, going on that note, Joanna, going back just a couple of years, Wes and I used to scratch our heads a little bit. And we felt like people perceived us as a commodity. And how do you, everybody, sometimes being a commodity-based service, people have like, from a business perspective, you're thinking of like, oh, I don't want to just be a commodity. I want people to care about me. I want to be a partner. I want to be, and those words start like kind of coming out in the conversation. And, for our perspective, it's providing this value back is a great way to be a partner. And any way you can demonstrate meaningful value back to your clients or anything like that, wouldn't inherently be easy for them to do themselves or whatnot, I think is just a great way to transitioning yourself from a commodity-based service to truly being a value add partner. I guess that's kind of how we've perceived it and our approach to it to date. So.
Very cool. Very cool. And I imagine that over the course of the last 2 years, those relationships have just deepened tremendously based on this transformation.
They have, and voice analytics, especially within healthcare, it's a hot topic. There's a lot of health systems, they want to better understand what their patient population are saying, and not just in the work that we do, through registration, pre-service, all these other areas. And think about all the interactions you have over a telephone call, in particular within healthcare. There's a lot of moments that occur in that. And I think health systems in general want to better understand those conversations, how they can then better serve the patient populations as a whole.
And I think for the longest time, contact centers were so information or data rich, but information poor because of all of the unstructured data, right? And interaction analytics is just that differentiator, that accelerator that gets you to the information you need to have those actionable insights, to make the improvements. I think we could go on and on about this topic, Max.
Yeah, I think we got another whole session here, or maybe another masterclass. Who knows?
Yeah, sounds like another series.
Well, and speaking of series, I think we're at a point of wrapping this one up. We've already gave our appreciation to you guys, and I'm going to do it yet one last time. Scott or Wes, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
I'll go first. So, I think getting all the way back to kind of what we covered, I think a lot of it is cultural. Scott and I are pretty engaged in the business, so we wear probably too many hats, whatever, analogy you want to use. And I know sometimes it could probably spread us pretty thin, cause us to drop the ball / take longer on things that maybe we enjoy. But the culture, I really think that now and in the future, that's going to define and set apart good, great, grand, wonderful. And, that's kind of what we're trying to achieve.
Couldn't say it better myself. I mean, at the end of the day, delivering a personalized customer experience, there's a lot of components that go into it, but it starts with culture. There has to be some form of digital transformation that occurs that is meaningful and impactful to that personalization that you're trying to achieve, and then keeping the emotional journey in perspective, through all that, and really making sure that you've put everybody in positions for success at the end of the day. And it's everybody from your frontline staff to all the support people that are involved in contact centers, and making sure everybody understands the vision, the mission, and what you're trying to achieve for that personalized experience that you're trying to deliver. Every business is trying to do that in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm. And not losing sight of that mission at the end of the day is just important. And at the end of the day, listen to your customers, understand your customers, and then position people and lean into everybody's strengths to deliver that great experience. And I think you'll succeed.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the culture as well. I being on the vendor side, building guns, and people can point them at their face or they can point them at the enemy. And it's been so heartening hearing you guys talk about culture and thinking about it right. And I don't know if this conversation's woken me up to it or I've just started running into the right people, but I've now multiple different companies I've talked to, they're talking about culture and trying to drive that and making that the point and moving away from speeds and feeds. And it just really makes me hopeful that all the stuff we talk about in terms of the importance of the customer and their journey and all of this is companies are getting it. And I really feel like it's starting to come home to roost. And that's just going to make dealing with, being a customer, which we all are multiple times a day, a better experience. And Joanna, I wanted to make sure you got the last word here. So,
well, thanks, Max. And I've got to say, this moment is so bittersweet. I have enjoyed the last 4 weeks with the both of you. It's been very insightful, and listeners, Scott and Wes, they've been in the trenches. They've done this. They've been successful in this transformation. And so that is really the goal of this podcast, is to provide you insights and actionable information that you're able to go into your organization and impact and influence change within your organization and successfully transform your contact center and customer experience. So I hope you all found this just as insightful and useful as we did. Thank you both so much. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's likewise.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate you, Max and Joanna. Thank you for having us.